Everyone, today I'm going to be doing a new type of guide, new type of video. A lot of the stuff I generally cover is, skill breakdowns. Here's all the skills, kind of how they work, and, I kind of think this one's kind of good for this reason, this was kind of bad for that reason, to help players kind of figure out what skills may be waiting for them ahead so they know if they want to invest time into them. And obviously, the other one is my build guides, where the character's at max level. Here's all the skills you have access to. Here's the ones that I think work well together to promote this type of playstyle from this character for X result. However, there is a third aspect to your character building that is important as well, and that is going to be priority. Which skills should you be sort of aiming for first? I wish I could give you a very detailed step-by-step, take this skill and then this skill at this level, this skill at this level, but I can't really do that for two reasons. The first one is I don't remember the exact level you recruit every single hero at, or what skills they start with, and if I wanted to get that level of detail, I'd have to do a bunch more playthroughs, and that's so many more hours, and ultimately I just don't think it's really that important to get that specific into it. And second is, a lot of these skills, honestly, there's some flexibility to it, where it's not like this one has to be the first one you get, and then this one has to be the second. It's just sort of an idea of, these are the really good skills they have, these are ones you should probably get sooner rather than later. That's kind of my goal of this video, and I plan to do this for each class. Originally, I was thinking about doing all of them in one, but there's just so many varying skills within the individual classes upon looking back at it. The video would be like an hour and a half long. I figured I'd start with defenders, and because Mordred is defender, the hero you're going to be using on most of the missions, this is a hero that I can get a little more in detail with, just because I do know for a fact he starts at level 1, and he starts with pretty much no skills. But I hope what I'm trying to do with this video makes sense, and hopefully if it doesn't, it'll become more clear as I go through it. So to start with the defenders, we're going to begin with Sir Mordred, like I mentioned, the main character, the one character everyone's going to be using, and he does start at level 1, so I can get a little more specific with this one. I do generally think the main way to build most of your defenders is their tankiness. That's generally a priority. However, the first skill I think you should take with him is Shield Charge. Shield Charge is a skill you want on every defender. It's absolutely amazing, great mobility, and it provides some CC utility in the form of a knockdown. It's great. After that, like I said, mostly gonna focus on defensiveness, but Mordred does have a unique spin to him where he's a very debuff sort of focused defender. I do think you do want to take upgrades on your stigma whenever possible. All of them are pretty good. And then, of course, robust. And yielding is alright. It's definitely more useful, I feel, earlier in the game rather than later, but it does have some useful defensive upgrades on it as well. Once you get into tier 2, the priority for me is Thunderbolt. It's an amazing move, good damage, can hit pretty much anything, and you can even get a stun on it eventually. Following that up, Armorer and the upgrades on that, because it has a lot of good defensive upgrades, is just really solid to get an AP back on him, and of course the defensiveness, like I said. If you do want to get offensive skills in here, I do think they should be lower on your priority for tier 2, and between the two of them, I definitely think you don't need both. I would go with Cleave over Flurry. And this Strong-Willed is definitely something you come back for later once you have extra skill points. Getting into tier 3, the first thing I always go for is Chain Lightning. It's an amazing skill, one of the best in the entire game. It's good damage. It can hit a lot of different targets that are spread out very far apart, and it has the shock debuff on it, which is an amazing debuff. Just an amazing skill. It's going to do a lot to help support your party. After Chain Lightning, this is kind of depending on what you think your Mordred may need at that point in the game. Usually I go for Hardened Armor first. Having reduction to armor loss, armor being one of the biggest ways to negate damage, just seems pretty strong to me. And then getting at least the base level shield block for the 5% extra block also being probably the strongest damage mitigation tool for defenders. Then after that, really, you're just going to be targeting what forms of defensiveness you want to get first, whether it be debuff resistances, extra HP or vitality, armor if you want to go back for these. At that point, you're really just, I think, mostly filling out defensive stuff. Moving down the line, we reach Sir Percivale. I do know that you recruit him in Act 2. You need Lady Guinevere to recruit him, and he starts around level 10-ish, I think, so he will have Tier 2 unlocked to him. I do know that you're probably going to want to respec him. I'm pretty sure a lot of these skills you can see I have on him right now is stuff he started with. I would definitely respec what I'm currently looking at here. Percivale is sort of a mix of some damage-oriented stuff and some support-oriented stuff. I definitely like to lean much more into the support stuff, so one of the first things I'm going to grab and make sure he has, and all three of these are kind of a toss-up depending on your own personal preference, but Taunt, Encouragement, and Guard. All three of these, very strong, and you're going to want to get pretty much all the upgrades on all of these skills as soon as possible. I personally like Encouragement the most, so that's the one I usually go for if I at least have Taunt at its base level. And after these three, honestly, it's kind of dealer's choice. I would shy away from the damage stuff and go for the more classical defensive stuff, like I mentioned with Mordred, things like Armorer with the upgrades, Robust, Shield Block. And then once you have enough of the defensive stuff that you are content with that, then maybe start going into the offensive stuff. Immolation is honestly a pretty good offensive skill. If you're going to have to take only one offensive skill, I would pick Immolation over something like Flurry. And one thing you can see here is Recuperate. This is a skill a lot of the defenders have access to. Not all of them, but a lot of them. This is just something I want to say. If you've seen my active skill tier list video, then you'll kind of know where I'm going with this. Absolute bottom of the priority list. I mean, like, I never take it. It's not that it's not a good skill. I just find defenders are so strong if you build into their tankiness that you just don't need Recuperate. It's just kind of redundant. I guess if you want to shy away from picking the defensive passives, then Recuperate has some more validity. But honestly, I think you're just better off going with the defensive passives. Up next, we have Gawain. Gawain is not a common pick. He's not very popular. He has the conservative trait by default. I've removed it on this one. So learning active skills costs 3 skill points instead of 2. He's an offensive-oriented defender, so I do think you should lead into that if you're going to use him. The highest priority for him, I think, is Freezing Attack. It's actually one ability that he has over other defenders that does really help make up for some of his shortcomings. Freezing Attack, you normally only see it on sages, and they're not going to be using it super often sometimes, depending on how you play your sage. With the defender, he's pretty much always going to be up in the face of your enemy, so he'll be using this on cooldown, and it's a strong move to lock down enemies. Definitely something you're going to want to get as soon as possible. After that, just at least make sure he has Taunt, some of the upgrades on it. If he's your sole defender, this is something you're going to want. And then following that up, probably Death Strike. It's a very strong move, really high base damage, just make sure the enemies have had their armor broken. And then the last thing I think I'll point out by name is the Monster Hunter passive. It's just a flat damage boost to most enemy types for 30%. That's a huge buff and a great way to help lean into his playstyle. Next up, we have the Red Knight, and the Red Knight's actually kind of a tricky one. I've played around with him a lot, and I think out of all the defenders, he actually has the most build diversity depending on what you want. He definitely can be built very offensively. It's pretty clear looking at his skill tree, and I think that's definitely sort of the intention. However, you can still build him defensively if you still want him as a just slightly more damage-dealing defender, but still focusing on the defensive side. He can do that, not quite as well as a lot of the other defenders, but he can still pull it off just through the form of knockdowns, rather than things like AoE Taunt and Guard. And of course, if you want some of both, there's the hybrid build you can do. I actually use the hybrid version of the build in my latest team build video, the Power Ranger build I did. So what your priorities are here really depend on which of these three options you're going to go down. I think most people are probably going to go with the super offensive option. I even have a build for this style. Posted that one a long time ago, a couple months, I think, at this point. And if you're going with that, the priority just in general is bleeds. You want to take as many of the offensive skills as possible and as many of the bleeds as possible. And then the two passives that are crucial for that is extra bleeding and master bleeding. Assassination is also amazing to get extra damage on those 40% or less vitality targets. It's kind of hard to pick what should be first with this case because you do get him as the 13 point tyrant option. So by the time you get him, it's going to be in Act 3, and he'll be recruited at level like 14, I think, 14 or 15. So he's going to be starting with access to Tier 3. And at that point, you just have so many skill points, you can respec him and just really take a whole bunch of stuff at once. So I can't really pinpoint what's the first thing you should take. It's just focus on the offensive stuff. You're probably not going to want kick, but if I had to name something, it'd probably be Death Strike, Assassination, the bleeding passives, and then just your other damaging active skills, following that up with taking bleed upgrades on everything else. If you're going defensive, you're going to want to take Mock and all the upgrades on that, and you're going to want to take knockdowns on all the abilities that offer knockdown. So that's going to be your kick, and that's going to be your throwing axe. Those two abilities you're probably going to want to upgrade first. Hybrid, it gets a lot more murky. Dealer's choice, really. I would probably alternate between taking a defensive and then an offensive, a defensive and then an offensive. And just whichever picks you want to take for those alternating choices, just whichever ones, suit your fancy the most. Lastly, getting into Galahad, the advanced Christian option, 13 Christianity points in the alignment system to unlock him. So like the Red Knight, when you unlock him, he's already going to have access to his Tier 3. However, I think the Tier 3 skills is something you should hold off on because his Tier 1 and 2 are absolutely stacked. Similar to Percivale, there's going to be the support skills you're going to want to focus on the most. Galahad is an absolute beast when it comes to defensive support. You want Taunt, you want Guard, and you want Divine Favor, and you want all the upgrades on all three of these abilities. And when you first get him, he definitely has enough skill points to get all of that. Moving past that, I'd probably try and get the stun on Holy Smite next, because having stun utility is always going to be useful, and then go for the standard defensive passives. Shield Block, Armorer, Robust, all resistance if you want it, Hardened Armor. And if you still have some skill points left over, then you can maybe start going into some of his offensive options. Personally, if I have leftover skill points and there's just offensive options left, I usually go with Cleansing Fire just because having some range can be useful even if it's not a lot of damage. Now, I don't have Sir Pelleas, and unfortunately I don't have him on any of my save files. Unfortunately for this video, not for my playthroughs, because Pelleas is super basic. There's really no reason to bring him. I cover this in my defender tier list. For him, you take Taunt, you take Guard, take defensive passives, and then after that, it really doesn't matter with him. Taunt and Guard are always the priorities, generally, for the defenders that offer them. And then he doesn't even have a special third ability to help him out like Percivale and Galahad does. So you just go for the defensive stuff, and then with the leftover skill points, I don't know, whatever you feel like giving him that he has left over. It really doesn't matter with him. Most people only really use him if they want a taunt defender to bring on side missions earlier in the game. But even then, I just use Mordred. So unfortunately, I can't show you his skill tree, and I don't really think it matters a whole lot because there isn't a whole lot to say about him. That covers all of the defenders. I hope this was helpful to some players out there, giving some of my insight on what I think are the must-have abilities, the things you should probably be aiming for first. And hopefully, by picking up some of these skills earlier on rather than later on, it may help you out in some of your runs. As I mentioned before, I do plan to go class by class, cover all of them, and if there's any specific class that you would really like me to cover next in particular, go ahead and let me in the comments. I definitely like reading what you guys have to say, requests. I definitely respond to that sort of stuff. And that covers it for this video. Thanks for watching.